In this presentation, I examine an unusual musical performance that was explicitly associated with a specific meaning. A good deal of background knowledge is required both to encounter the explicit statement of meaning and to understand how the performers attempted to convey this meaning musically. My presentation therefore devotes a lot of time to explaining the tradition the unusual performance is a part of, before explaining the details of the performance itself. This is partly a study of an extreme case within another extreme case, with the goal of revealing important aspects of less extreme performances that might normally go unremarked. The larger extreme case is change ringing, a participatory bell ringing tradition that originated in England and is still mainly practiced there. Change ringing's status as music is debated in the UK by ringers and non-ringers alike. The sounds of change ringing bear little resemblance to other musics, but the structure of change ringing as an activity fits Thomas Torino's description of participatory music very well. One of the key characteristics of participatory music is a lack of distinction between performers and audience. Everyone is seen as a participant or potential participant in actually making the music. Inside the bell tower, this is absolutely true of change ringing, and ringing performances do not generally have audiences that gather intentionally to listen the way they might to concerts of most other forms of music. But because change ringing is performed on large, loud bells, there is almost always an unwitting audience who may not know anything about the tradition. With the bell ringers, usually not visible from the outside, or even from inside the church, some people who hear the bells may not even know that they are being rung by humans. Change ringing is thus a useful form of music for studying the role of insider knowledge in creating meaning. Even people with no formal training in tonal music will build some knowledge of how it works and what different things mean, just because it is ubiquitous. The same is not true of change ringing. My talk today focuses on a particular bell ringing performance that broke with several change ringing conventions. This performance took place in Oxford, England, on May 6th last year during the coronation of King Charles III. In the words of the performers, it was rung to indicate the negative sentiments of the band surrounding the royal family. Oxford is a big center of change ringing, with many bell towers in a small area, so local non-ringers are likely to have developed some expectations of what ringing should sound like. They could probably tell that this particular performance was weird, but to understand just how weird it was and why, to pick up on the intended meaning of the performance, you would need to be a bell ringer. As a ringer, I consider this performance to have been an effective way of communicating the specific meaning. I'm going to attempt to explain why. For both ringers and non-ringers, insiders and outsiders, this anti-coronation performance could only hope to convey such a specific meaning through contrast with typical bell ringing. I will thus begin by explaining how change ringing typically works, with this atypical performance guiding some of my choices as to what features are important to know. The following clip from the 1934 mystery novel, The Nine Tailors by Dorothy Sayers, is an excellent short description of change ringing, including a bit of its relationship with other music.
The art of change ringing is peculiar to the English, and like most English peculiarities, unintelligible to the rest of the world. To the musical Belgian, for example, it appears that the proper thing to do with a carefully tuned ring of bells is to play a tune upon it. By the English campanologist, the playing of tunes is considered to be a childish game, only fit for foreigners. The proper use of bells is to work out mathematical permutations and combinations. When he speaks of the music of his bells, he does not mean musicians' music, still less what the ordinary man calls music. To the ordinary man, in fact, the pealing of bells is a monotonous jangle and a nuisance, tolerable only when mitigated by remote distance and sentimental association.
There is a more significant reason for not playing tunes on English bells, which is their physical setup is not well suited to it. The bells evolved long before change ringing was invented, and their initial function was communicative. As time went on, having more and larger bells also became a way for churches to display wealth. The eventual result was a bell that looks like this. It is fixed to an axle with a wheel on one end, and a rope that goes around the wheel and then down through a hole in the floor to the ringing chamber. Pulling on the rope causes the bell to swing. Interrupting the swing allows the clapper inside the bell to catch up to the bell and strike it. The heavier the bell, the harder it is to get it to sound this way. But with a full wheel, the bell can be swung back and forth, higher on both sides, until it is upside down. From this position, gravity provides almost all the energy needed to keep the bell swinging back and forth, and the ringer needs only a good sense of timing, not great strength. But a bell rung in this manner is a pendulum and can't be made to strike twice in quick succession. Waiting a long time between strikes is possible, but tiring. The easiest thing to produce is a steady beat, like a slow metronome. The gradual development of this physical setup and manner of ringing bells took place mostly within English churches, but the religious upheavals in England during the 16th and 17th centuries enabled separation to grow between bell ringers and church officials. When change ringing in essentially its modern form began in the 1680s, it was a mostly secular activity that just happened to take place in churches because that's where the bells were. The same bells might be used for clock chimes or calling people to church, but change ringing was separate from that. It was something ringers did for themselves. The early change ringers set out to produce the maximum variety of music within the extremely narrow limits of possibility of the instrument. They would get a carefully tuned set of maybe 6 bells, one person per bell, all producing a steady beat at the same speed, but slightly offset from each other so that no 2 bells struck at the same time. A descending major scale ending on the tonic was, and still is, the typical starting order. Here is a little animation of both bells and ringers performing in this manner. The bells are assigned numbers in this order, 1 being the highest pitch, also called the treble, and in this case 6 being the lowest pitch, also called the tenor. From this starting order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ringers apply one of many possible patterns with the goal of ringing the bells in as many different permutations as possible while maintaining the same overall rhythm, and with the restriction that the order can only be changed by swapping consecutive pairs of bells. Here is a short example of some change ringing showing the bells turning, the ringers, and the numbers changing order according to the pattern.
Look 2, triple's going, triple has gone. Go, wait, on 6.
Today, most active bell towers have a weekly practice night and service ringing on Sundays. Both of these events involve a series of short pieces of ringing, 5 to 15 minutes long. Who will ring in each piece and what is rung is decided in the moment by the tower captain based on the skill levels of the ringers present. Practice nights might have a bit more talking and trying new things, while service ringing is intended to be more polished. At both, the tower captain chooses ringing so that everyone present will be included at some point. This is a significant part of change ringing's participatory nature. The music is chosen and adjusted to suit the people, prioritizing inclusion, rather than choosing people to suit specific musical goals. At other times, longer pieces of ringing are performed. These include peals, which take 3 or 4 hours depending on the number and weight of the bells, and quarter peals, which usually last around 45 minutes. Peals, and to a lesser extent quarter peals, are rung partly just for the challenge, and partly to mark significant occasions. Unlike practices in most service ringing, the ringers and what will be rung for peals and quarter peals are set in advance. Successful performances are reported on the website Bellboard, run by the weekly ringers magazine, The Ringing World. Anyone can see the posts on Bellboard. It's a free and public website. It's common to include some sort of reason for the performance when posting it online. The last peal I rang was at St. Mary's Cathedral in Edinburgh for the 150th anniversary of the laying of the cathedral's foundation stone. The peal I rang before that was an all-women's peal, and that was its reason. As I mentioned earlier, change ringing began as a secular activity. The belfry reform movement in the late 19th century brought ringing and the church into a closer relationship, but though most church bell towers ring for Sunday services, it is not safe to make any assumptions about someone's religion just because they are a ringer. I was in the US for Queen Elizabeth II's last Jubilee, and we rang for that, but more because we like to ring than really to mark the Jubilee. At no point does any external reason for ringing, weddings, funerals, holidays, birthdays, directly affect the choice of what to ring. The only way the purpose of some ringing performance consistently affects its sound is that ringing for funerals and on Remembrance Day is typically done half-muffled, with a leather pad on one side of the clapper so that every other row is softer and gentler. There is a little bit of academic work on change ringing, but most of it is in mathematics. Exceptions include a pair of dissertations written by ringers in the 90s, treating change ringing as a form of music and studying it from a social science perspective. I owe a great deal to the one by Tina Stecklin, which was a case study of the change ringers in Kilifi, Kenya. Change ringing in Kenya sounds exactly the same as change ringing in England, but the musical and cultural backgrounds are very different. Experiencing change ringing in such a different context highlighted aspects of it Stecklin hadn't necessarily attended to before, but she also found the reception of change ringing in Kilifi was different from that of other English or musical colonial exports. Stecklin points out how change ringing often is interpreted entirely differently by performers and audience. For the audience, the non-performers outside, the sound of bells is necessary to signal or frame certain public events, such as a church service or a wedding, and it is sufficient that the sound exists. From this point of view, the particular piece being performed is of no importance. To paraphrase Boyes, the sound of bells is heard as a marker of the event first, and only secondly, if at all, as a form of music. What piece was chosen, why it was chosen, and how the performers were trained and gathered, and who the performers were, are equally of no importance. Inside the bell tower, all of these issues assume center stage, and the event, the functional framework of the performance, fades into the background. In most other musical traditions, what piece is chosen and why are very significant to both performers and audience. In change ringing, the piece chosen is important to the performers, but the motivations guiding the choices are very different from what they would be in presentational musics. In 1789, Charles Burney wrote of bell ringing that melody has not been consulted in the choice of changes. There seems a mechanical order and succession in them all, without the least idea of selecting such as are most melodious and agreeable. I will grant the mechanical order, but the idea that no thought has gone into selecting melodious and agreeable changes is simply not true. On smaller numbers of bells, it is relatively quick to ring all the possible permutations, but ringing all the permutations of 7 takes about 3 hours. Since most pieces of ringing are no longer than 15 minutes, bell ringers have looked and continue to look for ways to make sure those short pieces include permutations that sound nice. The simple goal of sounding nice may reflect an awareness that the audience will take any meaning from the fact that bells are sounding, not from any details about how they are sounding. Bells may simply be heard as celebratory regardless of what is wrong. Attempting to express negative sentiments, as in the unconventional performance guiding my presentation, is extremely unusual. Here is the bellboard post of what I have been calling the anti-coronation quarter peal. The way such an explicit meaning was attached was through what we call the footnote at the bottom. In many cases, as a ringer, I would consider that sufficient to give this performance its meaning. Many more ringers look at bellboard than will have actually heard any one performance. If the ringers say they were ringing for a particular occasion, they were. May 6th last year was a little different, though. There was an attempt to ring as many of the UK's bells as possible for the coronation. Again, this was taking advantage of an opportunity for publicity as much as it was support for the monarchy. But it meant that there was a great deal of ringing all over the UK on May 6th. A note on bellboard would make the ringer's intent clear to everyone who read it, but no one who heard the performance, including other ringers, would be able to distinguish it from the other ringing that day unless something about the sounds was changed. The performers did this in two main ways. They rang on a set of bells that produced a Dorian scale rather than a major scale, and they began and ended with an ascending scale rather than a descending one. Ringing only 6 bells in a 10-bell tower is perfectly normal, but choosing a Dorian subset is extremely unusual. These may seem like small changes, especially in the context of English music generally. As a ringer, they feel like huge changes to me because they are so out of the ordinary. Furthermore, reversing the direction of the beginning scale causes the treble and tenor, which have different parts in the piece being performed, to swap roles. The effect this has on the actual sounds of the performance is nuanced and relatively small, but as a ringer, it would cause the piece to feel very different. The weirdness of this quarter peal is quite a visceral thing for me. Here is a summary of the quarter peal's features and their relationship to typical bell ringing. The bottom row mentions the piece, called a method, that was performed. The way methods are conceptualized is entirely separate from the specific set of bells used and their starting order. The descending major scale is conventional, but not actually part of any method itself. Some of the power of this quarter peal comes from the combination of conventional and unconventional features. Ringing an extremely old and conventional method puts this performance firmly within tradition, and also probably made it relatively easy for the ringers, even with the modifications. The ringers used established conventions to share their performance widely within the community, while bucking conventions to communicate the seriousness of their intended expression. Much of the discussion at this conference looks at how individuals experience musical meaning, how individual composers seek to express new meanings, how individual listeners interpret meaning in the music they hear. As individuals, humans are deeply imaginative beings. Making meaning out of everything is a large part of the human experience. But there is another stage in the life cycle of meanings where they are shared and dismissed or rejected or accepted within a community. They can become conventional and form a basis for generating more new meanings. Music is sometimes considered powerful precisely because of its lack of semantic content. A large audience might all feel they have received the messages of a performance, but have a variety of different ideas about what those messages were. The internet has increasingly revealed how much this is possible with language as well. I've become interested in studying communities that agree on meanings, and agree when there isn't any particular meaning, partly just out of a desire to be better understood as a human and as an academic. Participatory musics can be great places to study successful communication, both about and through music, and I hope that the study of musical meaning can continue to expand in this direction.